Alright, it's been a little bit since I've made a video. That's my fault. I do apologize. Now, before I start this one, I would like to point out the background for this one was made by one of my friends. She did a wonderful job. I love it. It's great. She used the colors from Boba Fett, which, as I'm sure you can all identify from the title, there's a reason for that. Um, However, we are not getting into the slave one just yet. And no, I am not going to call it the Firespray. It's the slave one. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of a change up on this one. Just naming the stats on a ship doesn't fulfill the purpose I have in reviewing these ships. I want it to be useful to someone who doesn't fully understand what I'm saying, at least. So that way, if you have a writer who's looking into it, they can get some of the background, or an artist, and you can say, hey, here's a little bit of the background. Here's what it would do, and this is kind of what it would be used for. And in that regard, the original Firespray was made as a local system patrol craft. So we're going to have to go over what are those duties, what does it mean, and we'll review the ship from there. Now, for anyone who caught on, yes, that means I am doing the Firespray and the Slave one separately. So we're going to start with the Firespray as a patrol craft, and we're going to do the Slave one as a patrol craft. And no, I'm not going to do the Slave one as a bounty hunter ship because that is a extremely niche system where some things overlap, but it really depends on how you do your bounty hunting. And again, this is going to be assuming the pilot is of the same caliber. So if you put Boba Fett in one of these ships, it'll obviously perform better than if you put some Schmuckatelli in it. So we're going to go with Schmuckatelli for everybody and say, all right, what's the capabilities? So first off, a patrol craft has a few jobs. It's going to patrol your local territory, which kind of just means you do laps around the area. You look at everyone, you make sure nothing goes wrong. If you find a criminal, you're going to arrest them, so you need a place to put them. And sometimes those criminals fight back, so you're going to get into an occasional skirmish, which means you do need to have some armament, you need some armor, you need some defense, offense, the ability to maneuver, but it doesn't need to be extensive because this isn't your primary task. Your primary task is surviving all of this, because if you die, there's no one left to protect things. And obviously, in the course of your duties, you may come across an injured civilian, so you need to be able to render aid to them, so you have to be able to get to them, and then have enough medical supplies to patch them up. You may have to protect an MVP or an HVT from someone that's trying to attack them. Obviously, you're not going to do any kind of large-scale military defense, because for that, you would call in the actual military. But from kind of a squad of gang members, yeah, you may have to protect them from that. And then you need to reassure the local population, make sure they believe everything's safe as well, because that has add-on effects. And then sometimes you have to go and perform emergency search and rescue as well. So to that regard, I have this chart. And in this chart, there is a grading system from F to S tier, and there is a weighted system from double minus to double plus. So obviously the grading system is pretty straightforward, and the weighting system, I feel straightforward, but it just means that if you get an S tier and something that's a double minus, it's not going to affect the final rating of the ship anywhere near as much as an F in a double plus. And this rating system is for the job being done. So this is for patrol craft. And in that regard, patrol craft need to have anti-fighter duties because that's your low-level threat. That's the guys you're going to have to fight. So if you can't do that, you can't do your job. It's a double minus on anti-capital ship duties because if you're facing a capital ship, you should run and call the military. It's neutral on the frigates because that's going to be your smugglers, your cargo carriers. You do have to deal with them, but for the most part, they're going to kind of do what you want. Now, in order to make sure you track someone down, you need to be able to follow them. So sublight speed, that's going to be a positive. You need to be able to outmaneuver people because this is a space dogfighting area, so you need good maneuverability. You need tracking to make sure, again, they don't get away. Now, stealth is a thing that you may need to get away from a really bad situation, but by and large, it's fairly irrelevant. So while it's on here, you don't really need to worry about it. Prisoner transport, that is your primary goal, but as a patrol craft, you shouldn't need to be transporting a ton of prisoners. So as long as you can carry around 3 to 4 people, you're fine. Any more than that, and you call for backup. Now, for cargo capacity, this is going to be how you carry around all those medical supplies you need to help people out. Since you don't need much space for medical supplies, and it's not like you need to carry a ton of food around, you're a local system patrol, you don't need much cargo capacity, but it does need to be present. And obviously, you need some ability to communicate, but since you're typically going to be operating in kind of safe waters, per se, you don't need a ton of it because your comm should be able to get through with a fairly standard capability there. But then you also need good scanning. Not the most amazing, but you do need good scanning in case, again, one of those tragic events happens, like a volcano shows up or something. Or if you're going into a nebula, yes, I know. And finally, shielding, always good to have. There's rarely a situation in which more shielding is detrimental, so we're going to give that a plus as well. So let's go ahead and get into the actual breakdown of the Firespray. So for the armament on the Firespray, it has a pair of auto blasters, and depending on if you're in canon or legends, it may have concussion missiles. And since I think it would be ridiculous for it to not have concussion missiles, we're going to say that yes, it has concussion missiles. Now, while the auto blasters are definitely going to add some strength to it, and their ability to rotate is excellent for making up for any lower maneuverability you may have against an opposing craft, it's really not going to be very useful against anything larger than a starfighter. So while it does get a B plus for anti-starfighter capability, it's going to get an F on a capital ship because it's not going to do anything to those guys, and a D to an anti-frigate duties. It could hurt them. It might disable them if it gets lucky, but it is mostly going to be more of a nuisance than anything. So the sublight speed on the Firespray is going to come in a little bit under the X-Wing, so we're going to give it a speed rating of a B. You know, it's got decent enough speed, but the average person would still get pretty close to outrunning it. So its maneuverability comes in a bit under the X-Wing, and the X-Wing isn't the most maneuverable craft, though it is fairly nimble. So we end up giving it a maneuverability score of about a B minus for a patrol craft, mind you. And again, just as a reminder, this can be mitigated by those chin turrets being able to rotate. So just because you can outturn the ship doesn't mean you're out of its firing arc. Next up is going to be the tracking ability, which is pretty close to non-existent, so we're going to give that a D. And this is long-range tracking, not just immediate scanning. So really, if you get away from the Firespray, you're pretty much home free. And just like the tracking, its stealth capabilities are almost non-existent. Other than whether or not you can visually see it, it's pretty close to zero, so we're going to give it a D just because I didn't want to give it an F on the sole basis that it isn't screaming, "Here I am." Now, as for prisoner transport, it can carry 6 prisoners, which is above what we would expect it to need. So we're going to go ahead and give it a B plus, and I would, I'd even accept an A, but at that point, I would really want to see more like 10 to 12. So we're going to give them a B plus there. Now, as for cargo capacity, we don't have a direct number for Canon, but Legends has it at 70 tons and consumables for a month. Now, just a reminder here, when people put these kinds of numbers down in Star Wars, it means almost nothing. So we're going to go off what we know about the ship. So even though the numbers are there and I read them for you, I'm going to say it has some, but not a ton, but we are going to give it a C+. And that's perfectly serviceable because, well, not the primary job. Now, as for its communications array, it's a fairly standard bill, so we're going to give that kind of our standard number at a B as well. Remember, this was a prototype built for a smaller system. While it would have been top of the line for what they could have afforded, what they could afford is still kind of down on the list. The same holds up on scanning. It's got short-range scanners, but can't really do anything deep space. Doesn't need to, but that gives it a B minus. Now, the final category on our list here surprisingly gets an A minus. The Firespray ends up with 25% more shields than a Y-Wing. And that means it's going to take quite some punishment before its shields go down for a starfighter. Now, for anybody wondering why I just said for a starfighter, a patrol craft is not limited to starfighters. So, given that it is possible to have a smaller corvette being a patrol craft, I can't justify giving it an A, but I am going to give it that A minus. Although I will say it is just barely. So with all of that under consideration, I will rate the Firespray as a patrol craft at B. That means it's more or less average. That lack of tracking really hurts the Firespray. being unable to track down someone who's broken the law as a policeman is really not beneficial for you. Now, again, that does mean that the craft is average. It is perfectly serviceable to pick the Firespray as a patrol craft. There's nothing wrong with that decision. You just aren't going to be able to track down someone who wants to run away. And if you had some other motivation for picking a particular type of craft, such as Naboo picking the N1, where they wanted a very unique craft, then you can definitely get away with that. This isn't going to cause any major detriment to your security. So, now, in a twist that will surprise absolutely nobody, we are going to review the Slave 1. As a patrol craft, people, remember, this is not as a bounty hunter ship, this is as a patrol craft. I would potentially do it as a bounty hunting craft, but that profession changes so wildly depending upon the hunter that I feel it is an exercise in futility. So, with the acceptance that I'm going to just piss off people here, let's get into rating the Slave 1 as a patrol craft. Now, again, to start off with the armament, he's got the 2 laser cannons from before, an additional pair of laser cannons hidden much closer to the cockpit, a concealed pair of projectile launchers which could have proton torpedoes, but also other things like a homing launcher. He's got concussion missile launchers, an ion cannon, which I believe it's 2 of them actually, and those seismic charges that we love so much. And this means that the Slave 1 gets an A+ for anti-fighter capabilities. No, not an S. I understand, I know, but that ion cannon and the proton torpedoes are not well suited to anti-fighter duties. If those were replaced with something more specialized towards fighters, then yes, absolutely, I would have given him an S tier. But given that he's got some things that are more suited to larger ships, I just can't justify it. I would very much like to, but I want to reserve S tier for things which are truly unmatched. Now, as for anti-capital ship duty, the Slave 1's going to get a C-. Yes, it does have proton torpedoes, but that's really all it's got going for it against anything the size of a Star Destroyer or a Venator. And yes, proton torpedoes can do a lot of damage, but when that's your only armament against those and you don't have a whole lot of them, I can't justify giving you very high scores. Now, as for the anti-frigate duty, most of his equipment is still going to be able to do damage to a frigate, even the seismic charges. So, he definitely gets a B there. Not perfectly tailored to it, but definitely able to put on some hurt there. Now, all of this extra equipment, as long as the later stuff, did reduce the speed of the Slave 1 compared to the just baseline Firespray, so its speed gets downgraded to a C+. Most things are going to outrun this ship. I mean, good luck outrunning the missiles, though, but still. The maneuverability, however, I couldn't find any way to reference whether it changed one way or another, so we're going to give it the same rating at a B-. Tracking, on the other hand, that projectile launcher can shoot homing missiles, and those are very good. There are few things that are going to track better than a homing missile. However, you do have to hit your target, so I can only justify an A- here. Now, for stealth, while the Slave 1 is more capable of scrambling its signature, you still kind of know it's there, so it's ish on the stealth, so I'm going to give it a C. The prisoner transport, pretty much about the same, we're going to give that a B+. And again, on cargo capacity, all of the extra stuff, all of the fun new toys, reduces that some. So it gets a C, but again, not super important for a patrol craft. And the communication suite does not seem to have taken a major upgrade, so it's going to stay at a B. And as for its sensor suite, this one I do see where maybe I could have missed something, but from what I'm seeing, again, doesn't seem to have gotten that much of a major upgrade, so its scanning capabilities are going to be a B- again. Now, if you do know something where I'm wrong here, by all means let me know. But from the information I have on hand, the answer is going to be a B- here. And as for the shielding, though, that's going to be an A. I do know that got a bit of an upgrade, so he is going to be able to take a bit more punishment there. Something along the lines of what you would expect maybe a light Corvette to do. Again, we are going on the small side of Corvette, not the large side. Barely a Corvette. But all this together gives the Slave 1, as a patrol craft, a rating of an A-. And I've just pissed off a significant number of people. Now, I could see if someone wanted to say it was an A because of that A plus on the anti-fighter, and that is a plus plus. But do remember that maneuverability and speed do also have a strong count here, and the Slave 1 does not have a good showing in either of those. Or scanning. And generally what that means is that if you were a criminal trying to outrun a cop, you would be able to outrun the Slave 1 relatively easily. Again, good luck outrunning the missiles. That's what's going to get you. It's why people don't run. But if you wanted to, in a contest of pure speed, absolutely, you could do it. And that affects response times too. The police, aren't always right there when you need them. Sometimes they have to show up. So, sadly, the Slave 1 gets an A-. As a patrol craft, calm down. Please quit yelling about bounty hunters. I can hear it already. So, to end it all, I'm just going to go over the comparisons between the Slave 1 and the Firespray, just to go over some things that I thought were interesting or useful to know. The first one being that anti-fighter capability. And while it is a full letter grade increase, it's kind of only a 1 letter grade increase. The Slave 1 has a lot more firepower than a baseline Firespray. But at the same time, a lot of that is aimed at more heavy hitting equipment. Things like those proton torpedoes, the seismic charges. They're just not going to be overly useful against fighter craft. Yes, I know that's what we see the seismic charge used as a ton, but in a patrol system situation, if you're detonating a seismic charge, you've already lost. You've destroyed your local infrastructure. It's basically an unusable weapon. And then my second choice here is going to be the tracking. And just to point out how much of an impact those tracking missiles have. Being able to track someone across hyperspace or across in-system just from being able to hit them with one missile, that is a huge impact. That's one piece of equipment, and you went from a D to an A-. And I think that's just a really good showcase of how much one piece of equipment can make up distance in a category that you would otherwise think is lost. And then finally, I just want to go over the whole shielding again, because I do find it rather remarkable that the Firespray can take more punishment than a Y-Wing. But I do want to, again, remind everyone that this is as a local patrol craft, and you don't necessarily need to send out a one-person craft to do patrols. This could have been done with a smaller Corvette, or something that would be considered a gunship, or something, a multi-person crew that would have space to afford it a much bigger shield generator. And we are judging this on what we would expect a patrol craft to be able to take. So, more punishment than a Y-Wing, definitely good. But the most a patrol craft could take? No. And really, that's all I've got to say. So, thank you all for listening. I appreciate it. I'm sorry it took me so long to do this. It's just, I don't know. I hope to get back on the schedule. And again, I'd like to say thanks to my best friend for making the background on this. It really is cool. I do like it. Thank you very much.